Choke Point explained. Brad Thor's explosive thriller about betrayal, China, Bangkok, and the war for the world's most dangerous gateway. A devastating attack in Bangkok pulls Scot Harvath into a covert war where the real target is not a city, but the balance of power between America and China. The big idea. Choke Point is built around a brutal geopolitical truth. The most important battlefield is not always the place where armies are fighting. Sometimes it is a port, a canal, a shipping lane, a strip of land, a supply corridor, or a political crisis engineered so carefully that every major power reacts before it understands what has really happened. The emotional engine of the book is betrayal. Scot Harvath is not simply chasing a foreign enemy. He is hunting a man who came from America's own warrior class, a former SEAL whose skills have been turned against civilians, allies, and the fragile architecture of global security. That is what gives the thriller its charge. This is not just another race against a bomb. It is a story about what happens when elite training, greed, strategic deception, and great power ambition combine inside one crisis zone. The plot in one flow. The story begins with devastation in Bangkok. A series of bombings tears through the city, killing scores of American citizens and sending shockwaves far beyond Thailand. The attacks are not random acts of violence. They are designed to create maximum political effect, not merely maximum casualties. Bangkok becomes the visible wound, but the deeper target is the global decision-making system that will react to the wound. Thailand is immediately flooded with international assistance. The FBI's evidence response team is among those sent in to investigate, gather forensic evidence, and help stabilize the situation. Officially, the United States is responding through recognized channels. Unofficially, the president prepares something darker and deniable. Scot Harvath. Harvath is America's top covert operator, the man sent into places where diplomacy cannot go, and where official action would cause too much political exposure. At the start of the novel, he is not sitting comfortably behind a desk. He is back in the field, recently married, reconnected with his longtime employer, the Carlton Group, and operating on a deep jungle reconnaissance mission in the Philippines when the Bangkok crisis pulls him away. That opening matters because it shows Harvath's life at a strange point of tension. He has moved forward personally, but professionally he is still drawn into the same old gravity. A crisis, a threat, a shadow chain of command, and a job that official America needs done, but cannot openly claim. Then the central revelation begins to form. The bomber is not a conventional terrorist. He is not a nameless extremist. He is not merely a hired criminal with technical skill. He is Kevin Cobbler, a rogue former SEAL and an exceptional bomb maker. Public review material presents him as a former American operator whose bomb-setting ability drives a sequence of attacks designed to manipulate political perception and generate catastrophic escalation. That changes the entire emotional structure of the hunt. A foreign enemy is dangerous. A terrorist is dangerous. But a traitor trained by the same system that produced Harvath is more dangerous, because he understands American methods, American assumptions, American response patterns, and the psychological impact of attacking civilians with military-grade discipline. Cobbler is not improvising chaos. He is engineering it. His bombings are meant to create a story that governments, media organizations, intelligence agencies, and military planners will all begin to interpret under pressure. In a modern geopolitical crisis, whoever controls the first interpretation controls the first response. This is why Choke Point functions as more than an action thriller. It is also a deception thriller. The violence is real, but the violence is only one layer. The deeper operation is the creation of a false strategic picture. Cobbler disappears into Bangkok's underworld, using the density and darkness of the city to stay ahead of the people hunting him. Bangkok becomes more than a backdrop. It is a maze. Neon, traffic, tourists, surveillance gaps, criminal networks, diplomatic pressure, police confusion, and the constant fear that another bomb is already moving towards its target. Harvath is pulled into the investigation because he can operate in ways conventional agencies cannot. His mission is simple on paper: find the bomber, stop the next attack, identify who is paying him, and prevent the crisis from igniting something larger. But the simplicity is false. The moment Harvath enters the hunt, the book begins to widen. Kobler is not acting alone. He is part of a shell game designed to make the United States and its allies believe that someone else is responsible. The enemy wants the Americans to take the bait. They want anger. They want confusion. They want a rushed attribution. They want the machinery of retaliation to move before the truth catches up. This is where Thor's geopolitical premise sharpens. China has quietly deployed its most elite intelligence unit to Thailand, with the objective of creating chaos, triggering a military coup and seizing control of a narrow but critical piece of land. If Beijing succeeds, it gains a gateway between two oceans and a strategic advantage that could weaken American naval dominance in a future great-to-power conflict. The significance of this is enormous. The plot is not really about Bangkok alone. It is about the geography of future war. The Strait of Malacca and the surrounding maritime routes matter because they connect the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Whoever gains an alternative route, leverage over a canal corridor, or political dominance over a strategic passage can reshape logistics, energy flows, naval movement and crisis response. Spybury's interview summary notes that Thor uses Thailand, Chinese ambitions the Strait of Malacca, sabotage, bomb-making, and geopolitical manipulation as core background for the novel. That is why the title works. A choke point is where movement narrows. It is where trade, energy, naval access and political leverage become vulnerable. In ordinary life, people think of power as size, bigger army, bigger economy, bigger population. In geopolitics, power often sits in narrowness. One canal, one strait, one port, one computer chip supply chain, one financial clearing system, one passage that everyone needs and nobody can easily replace. Thor turns that idea into action fiction. Harvath's hunt for Kobler becomes a race against both physical destruction and strategic misdirection. Every hour that Kobler remains free increases the chance of another attack. Every false lead increases the chance that American intelligence will misread the sponsor. Every public statement, leak, or diplomatic assumption risks pushing the crisis in the direction the real enemy wants. The story introduces Rick Morrell as a former adversary forced into partnership with Harvath. This is a classic thriller move, but it works because it creates friction inside the mission. Harvath cannot simply operate with people he fully trusts. He has to work with someone whose history complicates every decision, while the stakes leave no room for personal resentment. Morrell's role gives the book another kind of tension. In a cleaner story, Harvath would gather a trusted team, hunt the villain, and outfight everyone. Here, the battlefield is dirtier. Harvath needs imperfect allies. He has to assess people quickly, make temporary alliances, and accept that old enemies may become useful when the new enemy is worse. This is one of the central moral mechanics of the thriller. Loyalty is not always simple, and betrayal is not always where the system expects it. Kobler should have been one of the reliable ones. Instead, he is the rot inside the trusted class. Morrell should be treated with suspicion, yet circumstances force Harvath to work with him. China appears to be the obvious hand behind the chaos, but even that must be assessed carefully because the whole operation depends on manipulated attribution. That is the book's real pressure point. Harvath is not just trying to defeat an enemy. He is trying to work out which enemy he is actually fighting. Meanwhile, a second plot line unfolds in the United States. A former United States Marine is being hunted and does not understand why. Desperate for answers, he turns to his ex-fiancée, a rising star in the White House. But she is not sure she can trust him. This domestic thread gives the novel a second pulse. Without it, the story could become a purely overseas action thriller. Bombings in Bangkok, covert operator in Thailand, Chinese espionage in Southeast Asia, former SEAL bomber on the run. The Washington storyline reminds the reader that the operation is not contained abroad. The people behind the attacks have reach inside America. They can hunt, silence, manipulate, and threaten people close to power. That matters because the crisis is informational as much as physical. If witnesses, analysts, officials, or former military figures know pieces of the truth, they become targets. The purpose is not only to kill civilians in Bangkok, it is to kill clarity. The Marine on the Run thread also mirrors Harvath's larger problem. Both men are trying to survive inside a system where the visible facts do not explain the threat. The Marine does not know why he is being hunted. Harvath does not initially know the full architecture behind Covert. The White House contact does not know whether emotional history can be trusted under national security pressure. Trust becomes a weapon. Distrust becomes a survival mechanism. As Harvath pushes deeper into the Bangkok investigation, the plot escalates through missteps and losses. Public review material notes that Harvath and Morrell make rare mistakes that allow the bomber to escape and cost the lives of valuable non-military team members. Those deaths sharpen the personal stakes and turn the mission from pursuit into vengeance as well as prevention. That is important for Harvath's character. He is not presented as an untouchable superhero who moves cleanly through every situation. He is highly capable, but the novel makes room for failure. His mistakes have consequences. People who are not soldiers die because the enemy is ruthless. The operation is complex, and even elite operators can be wrong when they are being deceived. This gives the middle of the book its darker force. The villain is not simply ahead because he is lucky. He is ahead because the plot has been designed to exploit the assumptions of the people chasing him. Kobler's advantage is not merely his ability to build bombs. His advantage is understanding how professionals react to bombs. He knows that investigators will look for signatures. He knows that intelligence agencies will search for sponsors. He knows that governments will want an answer quickly. He knows that public outrage compresses decision time. That is why his betrayal is so dangerous. He has not only sold his skills, he has sold his understanding of the American security mind. As the bodies accumulate, and Kobler slips away, Harvath and Morrell begin to recognize the larger game. The bombings are not isolated attacks. The Washington threat is not separate. The Chinese presence in Thailand is not incidental. The land corridor is not background detail. Everything is connected by the desire to trigger a reaction that benefits Beijing while obscuring the route by which Beijing benefits. The enemy wants the United States to see the bait, not the trap. Once Harvath's side begins to understand that China is being used as bait inside a larger political shell game, the strategy changes. According to Book Reporter's review, Harvath and his team realize they are being duped and respond with their own subterfuge, keeping enemies convinced they are taking the bait, while they continue trying to smoke out Kobler before another bomb kills thousands. This is the major turning point. Before that moment, the story is primarily a chase. After that moment, it becomes a counter-deception operation. Harvath can no longer win by merely moving faster. He has to make the enemy believe the manipulation is still working. That is a much more interesting form of power. In a conventional action sequence, the hero wins by shooting straighter, fighting harder or arriving earlier. In Choke Point, Harvath has to win by controlling what the enemy thinks he knows. He must perform belief. He must make his opponents think he has swallowed the false version of events while quietly building the true one. This is where the thriller becomes most aligned with real geopolitics. States rarely operate in clean moral daylight. They bluff, signal, deny, leak, conceal, test reactions, and use proxies. A strategic crisis is partly about facts and partly about perception. The side that sees the structure fastest gets the advantage. Harvath's response is therefore not only tactical, but psychological. He must suppress the natural desire for immediate revenge long enough to beat the architecture behind the attack. That is the difference between a warrior and a strategist. The warrior wants the man who did it. The strategist wants the network that made the act useful. Kobler remains the physical target. He is the bomb maker, the traitor, the direct killer. But the real enemy is the system using Kobler to alter the map. As the novel drives towards its climax, several lines of pressure converge. Bangkok remains vulnerable. Thailand's political order is under strain. China's elite intelligence operation pushes towards its objective. Washington is exposed to danger and manipulation. Harvath carries the guilt of losses already suffered. Kobler remains capable of another catastrophic attack. The title's metaphor becomes literal and strategic at the same time. Thailand is the choke point. The coming attack is a choke point. Harvath's decision-making window is a choke point. The truth itself becomes a choke point, because only a few people can still prevent a false story from becoming global reality. The final movement of the story, based on available public review detail, centers on Harvath's attempt to smoke out Kobler while preventing the enemy from realizing that the Americans have understood the deception. The book's public materials do not disclose every final operational beat, but the core resolution is clear in structure. Harvath's side must stop the bomber, expose or neutralize the manipulation, and prevent a crisis designed to push great powers towards catastrophic miscalculation. The emotional climax is not only whether Kobler is stopped, it is whether Harvath can stop himself from becoming exactly what the enemy needs him to be, a blunt instrument of rage. That is the cleverest part of the premise. The enemy is counting on reaction. It wants the Americans to respond predictably. It wants force before clarity. It wants public anger to rush ahead of strategic understanding. The bombings are designed to make patience look like weakness. Harvath's victory, therefore, depends on violence, disciplined by intelligence. He still has to pursue. He still has to fight. He still has to enter the dark spaces where official power cannot move. But he also has to think beyond the next door, the next body, the next target, and the next explosion. He has to understand why the enemy chose Thailand, why Kobler was useful, why the victims were selected, why the false trail mattered, and why the prize was geographical rather than symbolic. By the end, Choke Point leaves the reader with the sense that modern war is no longer cleanly divided between peace and combat. The crisis in Thailand is not an official war, but it contains the machinery of war: sabotage, proxy action, intelligence manipulation, civilian casualties, strategic geography, political destabilization, and naval consequences. That is why the book feels current. It imagines a world where the next global crisis begins in ambiguity. Nobody declares war. Nobody admits the operation. Nobody initially sees the whole board. A bomb goes off. A government reacts. A market moves. A coup becomes possible. A naval route changes. A rival power gains an advantage. The war has already started before anyone agrees what to call it. The main characters inside the plot. Scot Harvath is the center of the story, experienced, lethal, deniable, and increasingly aware that personal courage is not enough when the enemy is trying to manipulate the entire strategic picture. His emotional state matters. He is recently married, which gives the book a quieter background tension. Harvath is not a young man chasing glory. He has something to lose, but he remains the person called when the official system needs someone willing to enter the dark. Kevin Kobler is the antagonist who gives the plot its personal sting. He is dangerous because he is both technically skilled and morally hollowed out. A former SEAL turned mercenary, he represents a nightmare version of elite training: discipline without loyalty, expertise without honor, capability without restraint. Rick Morrell functions as the uneasy ally. His history with Harvath means the partnership cannot feel fully comfortable, but the crisis forces them into alignment. That tension strengthens the story because it puts trust under operational pressure. The former Marine in Washington gives the domestic plot its urgency. He is being hunted without understanding why, which makes him a human embodiment of the book's larger theme: people caught inside systems of power they cannot fully see. His ex-fiancée, the rising White House figure, adds emotional ambiguity. She has access, judgment, and proximity to power, but she also has personal history clouding her threat assessment. Her dilemma is simple and painful. If the man from her past is telling the truth, the danger is enormous. If he is lying, trusting him could be professionally and politically disastrous. The central conflict inside the plot. The central conflict is not merely Harvath versus Kobler. It is Harvath versus engineered misperception. Kobler is the man planting the bombs, but the deeper danger is the strategic deception behind him. China's suspected or actual role, Thailand's instability, Washington's vulnerability, and the possibility of a military coup all create a battlefield where every wrong assumption helps the enemy. Harvath wants to stop the attacks and identify the sponsor. The enemy wants to create enough chaos for America and its allies to react incorrectly. That is the real contest. The book's strongest tension comes from the fact that speed and accuracy are in conflict. Move too slowly, and more people die. Move too quickly, and the United States may do exactly what the enemy wants. The turning points inside the plot. The first turning point is the Bangkok bombing campaign. It transforms Thailand from a foreign setting into the center of a global crisis. The second is the identification of the bomber as one of ours. This shifts the story from counterterrorism to betrayal, because Harvath is hunting a man who understands the world he came from. The third is Harvath's forced partnership with Rick Morrell. The mission becomes morally and operationally complicated, because old hostilities must be suspended. The fourth is the Washington pursuit thread, where the former Marine's danger shows that the conspiracy reaches back into America. The fifth is the recognition that the obvious interpretation may be bait. Once Harvath's team understands that the crisis has been designed to mislead them, the book changes from pursuit to counter-manipulation. The sixth is the move to make the enemy believe the deception is still working. This is where Harvath becomes more than a hunter. He becomes a player in the information war, the emotional journey inside the plot. The book starts in shock. Bangkok is hit. Americans are dead. The world demands answers. Harvath is pulled from one mission into another before the full scale of the trap is visible. Then the story moves into anger. Kobler's identity makes the attacks feel like a violation from inside the wire. This is not just hostile violence. It is treason by competence. The middle is frustration and grief. Harvath and Morrell miscalculate. Kobler escapes, and people die who were not supposed to become casualties of this hidden war. The final emotional movement is control. Harvath has to master his own rage, read the board, and let the enemy believe the lie is still alive. That is the mature version of his power. Not merely killing the enemy, but refusing to be used by him. The ending explained. The ending of Choke Point, as publicly available plot material frames it, resolves around Harvath's recognition that the Bangkok attacks are part of a larger strategic trap. The obvious story is not the complete story. The enemy's aim is to trigger a misdirected response while using Thailand's instability to gain control over a critical geographic gateway. The meaning of the ending is that modern power belongs to the side that can see the hidden structure underneath the visible violence. Kobler matters because he kills. China's operation matters because it turns killing into strategic opportunity. Harvath matters because he can move between those layers, the street-level hunt, the intelligence deception, and the geopolitical consequence. The book's final lesson is not that violence solves the crisis. It is that violence without perception loses the crisis. The story anchor. The strongest anchor is the opening image. Bangkok torn apart by bombs while the world tries to understand what has happened. That image contains the entire novel. Civilians die in a city far from Washington, but the consequences travel instantly to the White House, the intelligence community, the Chinese strategic map, and the naval future of the Indo-Pacific. The bomb is local. The meaning is global. That is the story. If you only remember 3 ideas. First, the most dangerous attack is the one designed to control your reaction. The Bangkok bombings are not only meant to kill, they are meant to produce a specific political and military response. The real weapon is not just explosive material, it is panic, attribution, and miscalculation. Second, geography still rules the modern world. The novel's title points towards one of the oldest truths in power politics. Oceans, straits, corridors, and narrow passages still matter. Technology changes, but movement still needs routes. Third, betrayal is most dangerous when it comes from competence. Kobler is terrifying because he is not stupid, chaotic, or amateur. He is skilled, trained, and disciplined. When capability detaches from loyalty, it becomes a weapon for whoever is willing to pay. The sentence that explains the entire book. Choke Point is a thriller about the moment, when a bomb stops being just a bomb and becomes a lever powerful enough to move nations. Why this book matters. Choke Point matters because it captures a real anxiety of the 2020s. The fear that the next major conflict will begin through deniable action, proxy violence, infrastructure vulnerability, and strategic confusion rather than formal declaration. Its focus on Thailand, China, the Strait of Malacca, and maritime access fits a world increasingly concerned with Indo-Pacific competition, supply chains, naval reach, and choke points in global trade. It also understands something important about modern crisis politics. The first story often wins. If the wrong actor is blamed early, the damage may be impossible to reverse. What most people misunderstand about this book, the shallow reading, is that Choke Point is about Scot Harvath stopping a bomber. The deeper reading is that the bomber is only the delivery mechanism. The real story is about how violence becomes useful when it is attached to geography, political timing, and false attribution. This is not just a manhunt. It is a warning about reaction traps. Online summaries often flatten thrillers into hero versus villain. That misses the strategic architecture. Kobler is not dangerous only because he can kill. He is dangerous because his killings are designed to make governments misread reality. The internet version is bombs. China, Bangkok, and Harvath. The better version is this: a hostile power tries to turn America's own crisis response instincts into a weapon against America. The tailored interpretation. Choke Point is really about control under provocation. Every major force in the novel is trying to control something. China wants to control territory and maritime advantage. Kobler wants to control destruction and profit from betrayal. Washington wants to control escalation. Harvath wants to control the hunt, then realizes he must control the interpretation of the hunt. The book reveals a hard truth about power. The person who reacts fastest is not always the person who wins. Sometimes the winner is the person who can absorb the hit, read the deception, and strike only when the real target becomes visible. The real-life test. The real-life lesson applies far beyond espionage. In careers, relationships, politics, and leadership, the first version of events is often the bait. Someone creates pressure, frames the situation, provokes a reaction, and waits for you to overcommit. The Harvath lesson is not be passive. It is do not let the enemy choose the meaning of the event before you understand the event. How to apply the lessons without turning them into a fantasy. When something explosive happens, slow down the interpretation before you accelerate the response. Ask what the event is trying to make you believe. Ask who benefits from your immediate reaction. Ask what evidence is missing. Ask whether the obvious villain is the true actor or the convenient actor. Then act hard, but act on the real structure. That is the practical lesson inside the thriller. 5 questions. What is the enemy trying to make America believe after the Bangkok bombings? Why does Kobler's background make him more dangerous than a conventional terrorist? Why does Thailand matter strategically beyond the immediate attacks? How does the Washington storyline deepen the overseas plot? At what point Does Harvath stop merely chasing the bomber and start fighting the deception? The final lesson. Choke Point works because it understands that the modern world is full of narrow places. Some are physical, straits, canals, corridors, ports and strips of land. Some are political, moments when leaders must decide before the facts are complete. Some are emotional, the instant after betrayal, when rage tries to outrun judgment. Brad Thor's thriller puts Scot Harvath inside all three. The bombs create the crisis. The traitor gives it blood. China gives it scale. But the real danger is the pressure to react before understanding who built the trap. That is the final warning of the book. In the next great crisis, the first explosion may not be the real attack. The real attack may be the story the explosion forces everyone to believe.